Hi, it's Carly Chadwick. This is my Unit 17 Human Immunity. This is my presentation. Firstly, I will give you the aim of what this unit is about. My aim is to deliver a presentation that demonstrates my full understanding of human immunity. I'm going to show my understanding of the defences against disease by describing the first and second lines of defence. I will understand specific immunity, for example, the third line of defence, self-recognition and tolerance to own tissues, and two specific immune system disorders. I'll also explain that I understand biology by describing the categories of acquired immunity: natural, artificial, passive or active. I'll explain immune response to vaccinations, including immunological memory. The benefits of vaccinations by analysing measles, the infection rates within the UK between the 1940 and the present. I'll discuss the concept of herd immunity, vaccination programmes and factors affecting vaccine uptake. So what is an infection? So an infection is defined as an invasion into the body by microorganisms. Obviously, infection affects the white blood cells in the body. When you have a blood test, there will be a spike in your white blood cells on obviously showing an infection. Different infections such as bacteria, fungi, a virus and a parasite, they're the different infections that can obviously take over the white blood cells. So the first line of defence is the skin structure, which is made up of three layers: the epidermis, which is the outer layer, the dermis, which lies beneath the epidermis, and the subcutaneous layer, which is the deepest section. So what does it do? It prevents or impedes penetration of microbial organisms, prevents or impedes penetration of chemical irritants, prevents or impedes penetration of toxins, absorbs and blocks out solar and ionized radiation, and inhibits water loss. And as you can see from the picture that I've provided, it just shows you a breakdown of obviously the skin and the sweat glands. So the inner layer, the mucous membrane, is primary interface between the external environment and the internal environment of the body, such as the eyes, nose, ears, throat, mouth, gastrointestinal tract, urogenital tract and vaginal tract. The three sublayers are the lining of the epithelium, the lamina propria, muscularis mucosa, and as you can see from the diagram that I've provided to you, again it gives you a breakdown of the mucous membrane. So the gastrointestinal system is made up of obviously from your mouth down to your intestines. Effective barriers against infection within the gastrointestinal system are the stomach acid, pancreatic enzymes, bile, intestinal secretions. These all obviously protect against infection within the gastrointestinal system. So the gastrointestinal tract's powerful acids and alkaline secretions act to protect the system. The contractions of the intestine, the peristalsis, and the normal shedding of the cellus lining in the intestine helps remove both harmful and dead microorganisms, which will obviously be flushed out through the anus on your system. So the nasal cavity and airways is obviously made up of the larynx, the pharynx and nasal cavity. That's classed as your upper respiratory system. Many pathogens can enter the body via the nose, but are mostly filtered out before passing between the body and the external environment. So obviously from blowing your nose, etc., sneezing. So microorganisms that enter the body become stuck in the mucous lining within the nose, and these are removed by blowing of the nose, sneezing, coughing. That's the body's natural way of getting rid of obviously all the toxins and stuff in your body. So the urinary tract has a number of effective barriers. The urethra protects the bladder. Frequent movement of urine obviously flushes out the system effectively and flushes out any pathogens. Frequent movement of the pathogens will obviously stop you from getting infections. So obviously if there is an infection, obviously that's why we have to drink a lot of water to flush out the system a little bit more. So the pathogens can only be introduced by the bladder. Insertion of medical devices such as catheters or other surgical instruments. So the urinary tract is obviously the kidney, which would filter out obviously all the toxins, urethra, bladder, prostate, urethra. So obviously male, female, it's exactly the same sort of system. So the female genital tract, the vagina contains lactobacillia, which are bacteria that metabolize glycogen as cervical secretions from lactic acid. Acidity is around 4.5, which prevents harmful bacteria to grow. Obviously, anything above this or beyond it can be a sign of infection, which obviously 4.5 is the healthy region to be in, which helps maintain a protective barrier against infections. Prior to puberty and after the menopause, the secretion obviously gets less due to low estrogen levels, which can cause dryness and cause you to have a lot more infections. It can affect your sex life. And as you can see from the diagram, it just gives you a breakdown of the female genital tract that I've provided for you. So the inflammatory response is an array of cellular events such as response to infection or damage. The area of infection will show an increase in colour and will be warm to touch, swollen to touch and painful, which will obviously be your body's natural way of showing you that there's an infection. So once the inflammatory response process has begun, it will continue until the underlying infection or injury has healed. Again, the diagram I've provided you with just gives you a breakdown of what can happen with skin breakages and stuff like that. So macrophages are formed through the differentiation of white blood cells called monocytes. Monocytes leave the bloodstream and enter the infected tissue or organs. They undergo changes and become macrophage cells. And again, I've just provided you with a picture just showing what they look like under a microscope. So the most abundant white blood cell are major defence against pus-forming bacteria, which is the neutrophils. They have the ability to move and arrives firstly at the site of inflammation or infection, which you can see that it's got a protective barrier around it, engulfs by invading the organism via the phagocytosis, releases cytokines, which attracts further immune cells, which will obviously build up your immune system and fight off the infection. So cytokines and complement proteins. So they're produced via various cells to enhance the immune system response. Enhances immune response system by using signals and mediating inflammation and immunity. Causes further cytokines to be released, causing a cascade reaction. So obviously these all build up, group together and fight off the infection. So acquired immunity. Acquired immunity is not present at birth. It's learned. So as a person is exposed to the natural environment, the germs, etc., they encounter the antigens. They have the ability to learn, adapt and remember, and can be acquired actively. The body intentionally is exposed to a foreign antigen, or it can be acquired passively, introducing pre-formed antibodies to generate protective immune activity. So naturally acquired active antigens enter the body naturally. Passive antibodies pass from mother to fetus. So artificially acquired would be antigens that are obviously given by vaccines to protect you against something, and passive would be pre-formed antibodies in an immune system serum introduced by injection. So obviously the diagram again I've provided you with just gives you an explanation on that a little bit more. So immune system cells, so you've got leukocytes, which are your white blood cells, and the key element of the immune system. The monocytes, which are the largest and least common cell, turn into macrophages when exciting the bloodstream. So the eosinophils, which are quite rare in the bloodstream but important in relation of allergies and worm infestations. Basophils, these are the rarest. The secret anticoagulants and the antibodies. Also, it contains histamine, which dilutes the blood vessels. So lymphocytes, small round cells which play a major role within the humoral immune system. And the neutrophils, which are the most common type of white blood cell. Its function is to attach to the cell walls to block access to any germs to obviously fight off infection. You've got your lymphocytes, which the T cells account for 80% of all lymphocytes, and they mature within the thymus gland. They release a selection of certain substances into the bloodstream and signalling B cells through contact. So B cells account for 10 to 15% of all lymphocytes. Plasma cells produce and secrete a signal antibody type, which is secreted directly into the circulatory system. And then the memory B cells migrate to the lymph nodes, where these will obviously be inactive until a specific antigen is encountered and actually needed. So immunoglobulins, these target infections and neutralise the toxins. The complete activation recruit new immune system cells and remove the antigens from the body. So the activation of most cells are the immunoglobulins, even. So stimulate cells that can eat foreign substances within the body. So recognising self and non-self. So how does your body recognise between self and non-self pathogens? So the antigens, which are protein markers, which are an ID card on the surface of the cell's virus or bacteria. The antigens allow your body to recognise between self and non-self, so a foreign body, which is a pathogen. So step 2 would be when the blood cell identifies a foreign substance, and then the number of white blood cells will increase to fight off the infection. So 2 of the most important factors in allowing the immune system to distinguish between self and non-self are the major histocompatibility complexes 1 and 2, so MHC1 and MHC2, along with human leukocytes, antigens, gene complex. So all of this is a way the body recognises that there's something foreign within the body, and then will naturally build up extra white cells in the body, which will push out the infection or at least try and fight it off. So autoimmunity. So the causes of autoimmunity can be genetic factors, environmental factors, and NGNNS factors. So autoimmunity is the response of adaptive immune system to self-antigens that occur when mechanisms of self-tolerance fail. So these rogue B and T cells can react against self-antigens. So the environmental factors could be drugs, infections, gluten, over-sterile environment. Genetic can be HLA, DR. Endogenous factors can be high leptin levels, vitamin deficiencies. So there's just a few examples on here that I've provided for you. So reaction of transplanted organs. So they can be rejected by the receiver's immune system, which may recognise them as a foreign body. So obviously then it won't work, so it's no good to the body. So the more similar the antigens are between the donor and the receiver, which is why they try and get the perfect match to make sure they don't waste the donors, it's less likely then that the organ will be rejected. So the monoclonal antibodies can be used during or after surgery to knock out any specific T cells which can cause the rejection of the organ. So autoimmune diseases. There are over 100 different types of autoimmune disorders. Your body's immune system naturally protects you from disease and infection. However, if any of the following large number of autoimmune system diseases are obviously affecting you at the same time, your body will mistakenly attack them, and it'll try and kill off the healthy cells within your body. So multiple sclerosis, asthma, celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, eczema, psoriasis. These are just a few examples of an autoimmune disease for you. So active and passive immunity. So natural active immunity develops due to being exposed to the pathogens, which then creates the disease. Artificial active immunity is when artificially and intentionally exposed to foreign antigens. So natural passive immunity occurs when antibodies are transferred to one person and to another via natural means. Artificial passive is acquired by infection, transfusion of antibodies, or made by somebody else. So mumps is obviously naturally acquired. If you was to have an injection, that's artificial. Artificially, again, is a serum that you'd use, or would be obviously passive, can be passed on from one person to another via kissing, sexual intercourse, so the swap of bodily fluids, that sort of thing for you. So vaccinations are obviously there to protect us, and they can contain live pathogens, specifically treated to make them less harmless. So harmless fragments of the pathogen can be injected into the system. Toxins can be produced by pathogens, dead pathogens. It involves exposing the body's immune system to a weakened or harmless version of the pathogen in order to stimulate the white blood cells to produce antibodies. So for instance, the flu jab is obviously injected into us to protect us against catching the really bad flu, measles, mumps, rubella, tuberculosis. Obviously it's not so common nowadays, but these are just a few examples for you. So herd immunity is when a large percentage of the population is vaccinated to prevent against contagious diseases and the spread. So herd community can effectively stop the spread of these contagious diseases within the community. Some people obviously are against being vaccinated, so it can obviously affect the spread. It protects the most vulnerable, such as children, the elderly, and those that are too sick and obviously people that can't get vaccinated. So contagious diseases spread from one population to another, which is why we try to avoid the spread as much as possible by vaccinating herds, mainly as many people as we possibly can. So the vaccination programmes, adults can find it very difficult to attend clinics. Pharmacies have expanded their knowledge to be able to administer vaccines, making it more available. Obviously we know doctors are very busy and it's difficult to get into a surgery. There are some groups that believe vaccines can actually cause more harm than good, and some people choose not to have the children vaccinated with MMR, but obviously there's not much study around what happens to obviously the people that don't get vaccinated. Obviously they're more vulnerable to catching measles, mumps and rubella, so we would always advise obviously to get vaccinated, generally just to stop the spread of the disease and hopefully kill it off for good. Like obviously TB in our country, it's not very known at all that many people do get affected by it. So that's the end of this, so thank you, bye bye.